Hello, everyone, and welcome to this webinar. My sincere apologies we had some technical difficulties, so thank you for your patience, and thank you for sticking with me here. My name is Jane Endacott. I'm from Word Savant, a blog for badass writers. Excuse me. I'm here to talk to you about the 3 blogging pitfalls that repel readers, how to solve them, and make your readers say "hell yeah." So you're here, you're somebody who maybe blogs consistently, or you want to start a blog. Writing meaningful content is important to you. Maybe you have a message that you care deeply about and you want to share that message with your audience. You want to grow. You've gotten pretty good at this blogging thing and you know enough to get by, and you feel like there's more room to grow and to improve your skills. And you feel like that if you do that, then you can grow your audience and reach out to more people. You also want to improve your content. You're in a place where you want to grow and take your content to the next level, but you're not quite sure how to do that. You want people to hear your spectacular message, and this webinar can definitely help you with that. So what I'll teach you today, you'll learn the 3 common mistakes that bloggers make so that you can avoid them. I'll also teach you a simple exercise for becoming a badass blogger. And as a bonus for signing up for this webinar and for being with me here today, you'll receive a special promotion, which you'll receive a customized blog post review and consultation. I'd love to help you become a stronger writer, and this offer can give you the opportunity to have 2 of your blog posts reviewed by me, as well as to discuss any feedback over a 30-minute phone call. And that way you can be on your way to becoming a badass blogger. So I'll have some more information about that at the end of this webinar. So before we proceed, I'd like to just tell you a little bit about me and how I got here. I'm an English nerd from Lewis and Clark College. Reading and writing has always been my strong suit. I've been reading for as long as I can remember and writing since I was 12 years old. When I was a teenager, I spent my free time scribbling in notebooks. It gave me a lot of practice with writing. And as an honor student in high school and studying English at Lewis and Clark, I decided that I wanted to make the written word part of my life's work and my purpose. So when I got out of college, I worked for the man for several years, worked in government while I tried to figure out what I wanted to do and how I was going to do it. In 2012, I started my blog, Word Savant. I hadn't tried blogging up at until that point. I was really curious to find out what it was all about. There was nothing I was more passionate about and more curious about than writing, so I decided to make that the subject of my blog. And that way I could share about my writing knowledge and my experience. In 2013, I left my job to become a full-time writer and editor because I believe that you shouldn't settle for ho-hum writing, and I wanted to help people become the best they could be at it. So what I learned along the way, there's some very important lessons that I learned that helped me get to where I am. And it all goes back to when I was growing up in a creative household. My mother was a graphic designer. She had an eye for both good and bad design. And watching commercials with her or looking at ads, she would often comment on them. I'd hear her say things like, "I love that design. It's really cool and funky. I love the colors that they used." Or I might hear her say something like, "That design is awful and those colors are terrible. Why would anyone design that?" She would explain what she loved or hated about it. And that might sound like pretty harsh criticism, but because I grew up with a parent who paid attention to these things, she taught me to evaluate things for the creative aesthetic, and I learned the habit of doing the same thing. My mother learned by observing other designers and creatives in her field and noticing what worked and what didn't work about their work, their designs, and I learned from that example. So when I became a student of literature, I also became a student of close reading. As a student of literature and writing, and as an honor student in high school, I read like a maniac. Of course, I read everything for school, all the masters and all the great writers, but I also tried to read a lot of contemporary writers and people I'd never heard of before. And that provided me with a wealth of knowledge about what was out there and how people used the craft of writing. My teachers taught me how to read like a writer, how to closely study what I read, how to scrutinize things like language and structure or composition, voice, or technique. We would study really closely about how writers use these techniques and the kind of effect that they had on the reader. And from this, I learned all the different ways of writing. I did the same thing when I was in my writing groups. We would practice reading each other's pieces and critiquing it, commenting on what worked and what didn't work. So I got a lot of practice doing that, being a close reader. And all of that taught me how to read like a writer. I got into the habit of reading the way that I had been taught. So now, every time I read something, there's some part of my brain that reads like a writer and studies those elements. I'm just in the habit of doing it, even though I don't have to do it for school anymore. And just like my mother was a lifelong student of design, I have become a lifelong student of writing. I developed what I call my writing muscle. Everything I read like a writer. And that has been one of the best ways to develop my writing muscle and to improve my craft. And I became a blogger, and as I met other bloggers in the community, sometimes I would hear things like, "I'm not a writer." And I was pretty stunned by this, because if there's one thing a blogger does, they write content for their blog. A lot of blogs are visual blogs, crafts, do-it-yourself, or recipes, and they rely on a lot of images and pictures. But if nothing else, there's a little bit of content, and there's some writing that goes into it. And as I continued writing my blog, I thought of ways that I could help people like this, people who were saying these things to me. And I also thought of the mistakes that people commonly make, and with a little know-how, they can be easily avoided. I read a lot of content on the internet. I read a lot of other blogs, other sites, other articles to see what was out there. And as I did that, I found mistakes that I commonly see. Mistakes that people make in the writing. And these are mistakes that make me want to stop reading because I either feel bored or confused or uninterested or just plain annoyed. Mistakes that take the fun and enjoyment out of the reading experience. So these mistakes are very easy to avoid. So without further ado, let's go ahead and talk about what these mistakes are. So the first mistake: don't shoot a field mouse with a shotgun. I also call this the funnel. The funnel is a term I use to describe a technique that some writers use to get their message across, and it's the least effective tool that you could possibly use. Describes somebody who starts from the very beginning. So if they're talking about a subject and they start from the widest point possible, and then the writer gradually narrows it down until they get to the point that ultimately they are trying to make. So to use an example, let's say I were writing an article about the start of human civilization. So if I were using the funnel, it would look a little something like this. The Earth was created about 4.5 billion years ago, and as it cooled, the atmosphere formed, continents and oceans formed, plants and animals and gigantic reptiles existed for millions of years before going extinct, and one day a fish crawled out of water and over time evolved into a primate. Primate evolved into a human over thousands of years. Human lived as hunters and gatherers for a long time, and then humans learned to grow things in the ground, grow their food, And that caused the agricultural revolution, which roughly was how human civilization formed. So I'll pause for a moment and I'll ask you, what were you doing while I was talking about that? What was going through your head? Maybe you started looking at your phone and answering an email. Maybe you regretted signing up for this webinar. Maybe you started playing Angry Birds. I don't know. But you got distracted. You got bored. And that's the problem with the funnel. Your readers are waiting for you to get to the point. Writers think that this funnel is important, that they need this. They use this as a crutch in order to get to their message. And the fact is that they don't need it. It's a great technique during the writing process when you're trying to figure out your message, when you're trying to figure out what to say and how to say it. I use it all the time when I'm writing first drafts. I find it very helpful if I know the message is in there somewhere, but I just need to know how to get to it. But ultimately, in the editing process, as you're revising your piece, you need to ditch the funnel and just take it out. And how do you do that? How do you ditch the funnel? Well, you find the narrowest part. Where is the part where you say, hell yeah? That is the place where you just need to start. That is the most interesting point of your piece. In the blog verse, you really need to grab people by the collar. You really need to get their attention right away, because they have a very short attention span that you could lose in a matter of seconds. And so if they start to get bored, they're going to wander off. But if they can say hell yeah with you, then they will want to keep reading. And if you can do that, you can ditch the funnel and get your readers' interest right away. What you create is a very compelling beginning. They will want to keep reading. They won't want to wander away. They will want to know more, and they'll be hungry for more. And that's the place to start. That's where people become immediately interested and they want more. And they have a very compelling story instead of an encyclopedia article. Okay. So, mistake number 2. Don't pack an elephant in the backpack. So, imagine your readers are carrying a backpack and they're taking this backpack with them on a journey that you're going to take them on. Every detail you give them is something that they're going to pack into that backpack. Those details, they're going to take those details with them along the way on their journey. They're going to carry it with them. When I say carry it with them, I mean they're going to read your piece and remember all the details that they can, because some part of them feels like that detail is important. It'll be important for them to know along the way. So to give you an example of this, recently I was working on a blog post for my blog where I talk about the path of how I became an endurance runner. And I tell a story. When I was a kid, we moved to Colorado, spent the first few days hiking in the Rocky Mountains with my great Uncle Tom, who lived there at the time. And in my post, I was describing Uncle Tom, who's a really interesting guy. He's lived an amazing life. He's a Catholic priest. He's traveled to many different countries, and he was in the Army for a long time. And so I was describing Uncle Tom using these details. And as I was doing that, I realized, I didn't really need the details because these particular things didn't lead to how I became an endurance runner. They had nothing to do with my path to become an endurance runner. They're very interesting about, things about my Uncle Tom and his personality, but as far as that particular story went, they weren't that relevant. And I realized I was making this mistake. I was trying to squeeze too much into my reader's backpack. So why is this a problem? The more details you give your readers, the heavier that backpack gets. Too many details are going to bog them down. It's going to feel heavy. And instead of packing all these things in there, ask yourself, Is this valuable to them? Are these details valuable to the reader? Give your reader only the essentials. And when you do that, your reader is only packing things that they're going to need in that backpack. They're going to be packing things like food and warm water and warm clothes, mittens and a hat, maybe a scarf. Instead of packing things like a curling iron and a bag of Cheetos and a gossip magazine and like a Rubik's Cube or something like that. So that is packing an elephant in a backpack. Mistake number 3. Don't ride a high horse over a low bridge. Not too long ago, I was reading a post online, an article about body image. And as I was reading it, I noticed that there was something about the voice that bothered me. I couldn't quite put my finger on it. So I read it over a few times, kind of looked closely at it, did my close reading, and I realized that it had something to do with the language. The author was using some foul language peppered in her writing. Nothing too offensive, just pretty standard stuff, words I use every day. And while she was using this foul language, she was also using soft language to describe things like delicious and juicy and raw. And it was really confusing to see these two different types of language together. So what's the problem with that? Well, there's nothing wrong with either of these voices on their own. They're perfectly fine by themselves. When you put them together, I didn't find the voice very credible. Juxtaposing words like delicious and juicy didn't make me believe her when she said words like damn and ass. I felt like one voice was canceling out the other voice and rendering it inauthentic. The author of the piece was trying too hard to dress up her language, and in the end, she ended up overdoing it. You don't have to dress up your language or be hyperbolic to get people's attention and to make them believe you and to make them believe your message. You can give a really strong a really strong message simply by being clear and concise. And how do you do this? How do you do that? You can ask yourself, a question. How would I say this if I were in a conversation with a friend? Writing it this way, writing it the way you would say it to a close friend creates a comfortable atmosphere with the reader. It puts the reader at ease. It makes them feel like you're just being yourself and you're speaking to them personally. It gives them some authenticity because they get the sense that you're being yourself. And so that's the third mistake. That's high horse under a low bridge. As I was putting this webinar together, I asked myself a question: why are these mistakes so common? Why do I see them so much in other people's writing? And I think that sometimes bloggers don't think from the perspective of a reader. They don't think about what the experience is for the reader. Reading through the post, reading the story, reading all the details, reading the language. They haven't learned what works and what doesn't work because they never learned how to read like a writer. I strongly believe that reading like a writer makes you a better blogger. Reading like a writer helped me develop my craft. It helped me become a stronger writer. It taught me to see what works and what doesn't work. So when I was making the mistakes in my own writing and as I was editing and going through my own revision processes, I could see them more easily. And I think that if you take the time to learn it, you can become a stronger writer too. So that brings me to exercise that I'd like to teach you, an exercise for reading like a writer. As you're reading content, either online or offline, can be anywhere, can be anything, just take a few moments to ask yourself 2 simple questions. First question, what works about this piece? What do you like about it? What was strong about the post or the article, or whatever it is that you're reading? Do you like the voice or the language, how they described something? Did they offer a unique perspective? And did they use a writing technique that you thought worked really well? Excuse me. And then the second question, what doesn't work? What was something that made the writing, was it something that made the writing inconsistent? Did they ramble on about a topic and lose your interest? Was the content unorganized or poorly structured? Did they rant a lot? Just take a moment to reflect on these two questions. And I strongly encourage you to, if you can, if you have the time, to write it down, to make a note. You don't need to write a 5-page essay or anything like that, but just taking a few notes on these observations, what works and what doesn't work in the pieces that you're reading. It will help you, it'll help these ideas sink in. You will learn them better. You will work your writing muscle. The more you practice, the stronger your writing muscle will get. And as you learn what works and what doesn't work, you'll start to notice these things in your own writing as well. You'll start to see when you're making these mistakes. And you won't have to work as hard. You won't have to struggle as hard to create great work. And my New Year, New Badass blogging package, which is what I'd like to offer you today, I really believe that it can help you do that. It can help you recognize some of the mistakes that you're making. I'll be able to point out to you what is strong about your writing and what can be improved, what can be better. And with the package, you'll receive the 2 professional blog edits that I mentioned at the beginning of the webinar. I'll give you some feedback on 2 blog posts. They can be published or unpublished. And I'll highlight for you what's working, what you're doing really well, what are your strengths that you need to bring out, and what doesn't work. What are some of the dead wood that you need to cut? And with that, I'll also include a 30-minute consultation call. During that call, we'll discuss any feedback that I read for your review, and we'll also identify 2 to 3 obstacles that are getting in the way of your best work, 2 to 3 solutions to bust through your biggest content problem, and it'll help you find the clarity with your content creation. So I will, the package is valued at $97. I'm going to be offering this through January for a slight discount, but I'll offer it to you today for only $25. I really appreciate you joining me for this webinar. You can find me at wordsavant.com, and I will email you the link to, if you'd like to purchase this offer for the New Year, New Badass blogging package. I will email it to you after this webinar. And even if you don't purchase anything from me, I really appreciate you being here today and taking the time to learn and grow. And I hope to hear from you again soon. Thank you very much.